Today is February 3rd, 2007. We're in Bellingham, Washington today to interview Francis H. Becker, who served on the Iowa Supreme Court from September 20th, 1965 to March 31st, 1972, about approximately 7 years. We're in the home of a neighbor of his daughter, Red Becker, to talk to him about his career, celebrated I'd say, on the Iowa bench, and his career after being on the bench and what he did before. And I'm pleased to be able to come to Bellingham, Washington and do this, Judge Becker, and thank you for participating.
You're entirely welcome.
By my calculations, you served with 13 other justices, Eugene Thornton, Bruce Snell, Edwin Moore, Theodore Garfield, Robert Larson, William Stewart, M.L. Mason, Maurice Rawlings, Clay LeGrand, Warren Reese, Harvey Uhlenhop, Ward Reynoldson, and David Harris.
That surprises me.
Well, I hope I'm right, but I think I'm close in any event, and that you were replaced by Mark McCormick when you retired in 1972.
That's correct.
We'd like to talk a little bit about your earlier days. Did you grow up in Dubuque, Iowa, Frank?
Yes, I did. I was born and raised in Dubuque, Iowa.
And educated there?
I went to St. Patrick's parochial, Roman Catholic parochial school, and I went to what was then Columbia Academy and then became Loras Academy, which was an academy connected with Loras College. And from there I went to St. Louis.
Can you tell us a little bit about your parents?
Well, my dad was one of 6 boys, had a 6th grade education, had a lot of energy and pep until he had a stroke, and was a salesman for one thing and another. So he didn't have the edge. He was one of the 6 boys. The oldest one became a pharmacist, and the second oldest became a judge, not a judge, became a doctor, and the third oldest became something else, and then the other 3 got left out as far as the higher education was concerned. But he was a great guy and a great man as far as I was concerned.
And your mother?
She was born, I guess, and raised out near Monticello, Iowa, and Anamosa, Iowa, in that area, and came here to marry my dad, I think. And she had she was a graduate of the Visitation Academy, which was high school, had high school, credentials, and was a politician, a red-hot Democrat, and served as county chairwoman from time to time. Got after some of the candidates when she didn't think they were doing right, but she was a kind of fun person and very interested in what was going on. And I had 1 brother and 4 sisters. My brother went a year to West Point and then failed, and he took a special course, but he decided he didn't want to go back, so he went to law school down in St. Louis. And it was there that I went down and lived with him 5 years when I went first to St. Louis University for 2 years for pre-law, and to Washington University in St. Louis for the law.
Was there anyone in Dubuque who influenced you think, to go there, or did you go there because your brother was there?
Mostly because, entirely, I would say, because my brother was there, yeah.
Anyone in your early education that influenced you think?
No, I think probably my brother to some degree. When I got old enough, I hitchhiked down there and visited him 2 or 3 times when, I was like 15 or I think about 15 is when I started to hitchhike down there in the summertime My sister Helen was a school teacher in Detroit, and she would have influenced me, and probably did in ways that I wasn't aware of, to to get an education and keep on going to school.
And after law school, you came back to Dubuque?
Yes, yeah. But before that, I was skipping one thing. I stayed out of when I graduated from high school. I think it was 1934. Right in the middle of the Depression, and I stayed out of school a year, part of which time I sold magazines in a crew that ended up in Fargo, North Dakota, and finally got down. That was after I had 1 year of pre-legal that I did that. Pardon me.
Sure. Did you, when you came back to Dubuque to practice law, did you associate with anyone?
No. I went all over town, talked to all the lawyers, tried to get into with somebody, and nobody was interested at all. And of course, as I underline again, this is right in the middle of the Depression, and so I had $50 that I had split a $100 ASCAP had a contest to write about law involving copyright and so forth, and another fellow in a class, and I got $50 each. They split the two because we wrote our term paper on that. It seemed to be the sensible thing to do, since you wouldn't get anything for anything else. So let's see, where was I? I enjoyed hanging around. Well, first of all, I think I should mention I got a job with the National Youth NYA, National Youth Agency. That was something like the Civilian Conservation Corps, only it was pretty much all cities. But I didn't, it wasn't just one of the hired hands. I got a supervisor's job. My brother was politically active in St. Louis, and that didn't hurt me any, I'm sure of that. But anyway, I got appointed at that, and I think for probably as much as nearly 3 years, I earned, for that time, pretty good money. I don't know how much it was, but it was, for somebody that was still going to school, I was doing pretty well. Just a minute.
Well, are we got back to Dubuque? When all this happened before you got to Dubuque, I take it?
Before I got, yes, yeah. And we went back up in the summer a couple of times. Bill and Dorothy, his wife, drove me, and a couple of times, more than a couple of times, I hitchhiked. Once I took the bus. I sold magazines that one summer, because there was nothing else, no other jobs, there was nothing else to do, so I just went, and it just made enough to eat. Is about it. Ended up in Fargo, North Dakota, and my brother called me and said, if you're not back here by next Tuesday, this was about a Tuesday before, you can't go to, you can't register for this semester. So that meant I had to get going.
Okay.
My memory is, this is just a memory, that I sold my extra pair of shoes for $2. I know I had about $2. I hopped the freight train, which was the first time I'd ever done that, while it was moving, and crawled up behind the engine. It was an old time with a white stuff spouting out, and that white stuff is not all white. It's full of cinders, I'll let you know. But
Steam engine, yes.
I was sitting up there, and this gives you some idea what it was like for kids. Behind the engine with another youngster that wasn't any smarter than I was. And the brakeman came along and he said, "What are you two doing here?" And I said, "I'm trying to get back to St. Louis." And the other kid said something. Well, he said, "You can't stay here." No, he said, "We're going to get water up here in a half hour. When we stop for water, you get off, and 17 cars back, there's an empty. And you get into that empty, and then you can get out in Minneapolis when we get there." So we said, okay, and that was very nice. And there were so many kids at that time riding the rails that they were, I think, even for self-protection, fairly decent, you know, but I think they were decent anyway. But we ran back. It was dark by that time, putting our hand on the side, counting the boxcars, and came to the empty and crawled in, but it wasn't empty. It was full of young people. I would say there was at least 25. This is just a memory. Maybe as many as 50. Almost all under the age of 20. Just riding from one place to the other, you know. So anyway, we kind of bedded down there and woke up in Minneapolis. I went out at that time. I've often thought about that. They didn't have you could go into a restroom at a filling station and wash up. You know, that's when they finally began to lock the filling station doors. You know, as kids like me, you go into using the place to wash up and clean up. Anyway, I hitchhiked down to La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I think it's worth telling because of the attitude of people at that time. I went out to the Milwaukee railroad yards, and I could look down where the trains were, the freight trains. And a fellow came up next to me and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I want to get to Dubuque tonight. And I think that train down there goes." He said, "Yes, it does." But he said, "If you stay here, the railroad cops are going to pick you up. You get out of here and you come back here at 6 o'clock. And there'll be a man here and he'll tell you where to go." Now, I think it's worth telling that because that was what people were doing to help other people, you know, and to help young people. So I did, and I came back, and sure enough, there was a man there, and he pointed out the right railroad track, and I went down there and climbed in. It wasn't empty; it was full of kids, you know, like the other one had been. But I rode down to St. Louis to Dubuque and spent my last quarter. At that time, you could go any place in town in a taxi in Dubuque for 25 cents. So I rode home in Splendor from the Milwaukee yards to which was a couple miles, to my mother's house.
And this is while you were still in law school?
This was, yes, yeah. Let's see, yeah. In fact, it was my first year, at the end of my first year, I think.
Okay, and then in 1939 you graduated from Washington University Law School.
Yes.
And went back to Dubuque then?
Yes, yeah.
And practiced
I went
there?
all over town. I couldn't find anybody that would take me in, so I had $50 that I'd gotten from a contest writing my thesis, and split the other 50 with the 100 with Doherty, another student. But so I had $50, so I rented an office. but I didn't have anything else.
Hung out your own shingle.
Pardon?
Hung out your own shingle.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and Bob Riley was a friend of mine, my family, who was a legislator, and he had a Iowa Code, 3 volumes, which he gave me, because they gave him a new Iowa Code every year. So that was my first. Well, I don't know how far loquacious I should be about all this.
Well, tell us about your early days. I take it you practiced and were an assistant county attorney before the war.
That was before I got to be assistant county attorney. Upstairs there was a lawyer who died very soon after I contacted him, Al Nelson, and I went upstairs in the office building I was in, and asked him if I could rent the room on the other side of his reception room. Told him I'd do the legwork for him. And he said, yeah, that's okay, and I'd try to help him. Well, he only lived about less than 6 weeks, I think. He died very soon. His brother-in-law was in Sioux City and called me and said, if you can clean up. Well, he had a cousin who took most of the decent cases he still had, and so this brother-in-law called me from Sioux City and said, if you can clean that up, his office, and get that closed up for me, you can have his library. Well, it wasn't very big, but it was a full set of Iowa reports, which I really needed, and there was an Iowa Digest. So I had the basic tools that I had to have, and it wasn't long. A man by the name of Gene Kane ran for county attorney, and at my mother's suggestion, among other things, I contacted him and told him I'd be his gopher guy if he wanted, if I could be the assistant when he got the job. And he said, that's fine, that's okay. So he ran for county attorney, and I ran with him and got elected. And so I was off and running, because then I had a salary, and I had the county paid for a secretary and paid for my office. They didn't make me go to the courthouse because they didn't have room in the courthouse anyhow to house the county attorney's office. So it worked out very fortuitously, let me say that.
And you did that until World War II came?
No, I'm taking a long time, and I'm sorry, but...
Don't be sorry.
No, World War II, I have to think a little bit. Well, the answer to that, I guess, is yes. I stayed in as assistant county attorney until World War II came, which was December 25th, 1941. And about April, I quit and went down, and my number was up anyway. I was going to be called, so and joined the Army, and went down to St. Louis, to Des Moines first, and then they shipped us down to St. Louis. And we took some tests, and of course the lawyers used to taking tests, so there was a lot of lawyers, and we got to pick whether we were going to be in weather prognostication or radio. Well, the radio people were being trained in East St. Louis, and my girlfriend lived in St. Louis, so I elected to go to East St. Louis for 3 or 4 months, where I got trained as a radio operator. I went around the country a little bit, being transferred. There was sometimes they didn't know what to do with us. But right about that time, and I think that did have something to do with it, Madam Chiang Kai-shek made a speech in Congress about the fact that China was going to lose and Japan would be opened up on everybody else if they didn't get some help over in China. So then there was a big push, you know, to do something about getting help into China. At that time, every port in China was occupied by the Japanese. So the only way to get material or men or anything else into China was to fly from India to China over what we call the hump.
The Himalaya Mountains.
Yeah, yeah. So there was a big push to get a bunch of transport planes over there, and I got into that. I got swept up in that and ended up in Tezpur, India, for I guess it was 2.5 years.
And this is with the Army Air Corps?
Yes, yeah.
And you flew in transport planes that flew over the Himalayas to deliver supplies to the nationalist Chinese.
Yeah.
And what was that like?
Well, it was. We had our losses. It was the weather was mostly is what got to you, but sometimes overloading, so you couldn't take off, or something would go wrong on landing. It was fairly rugged duty. I don't know whether I ought to mention this or not. It was rugged enough that I was awarded the Air Medal with 2 Oak Leaf clusters and the Distinguished Flying Cross with 1 Oak Leaf cluster.
How many missions do you remember how many you would have flown?
I know, and still got my record. I want to say 97, but I'm not sure of that. I know that the pilots got to go home when they flew 50 missions, but they were short of radio operators, so we didn't get to go home when we flew 50 missions. And I think, as I say, it was in the 90s, I'm pretty sure. I figured when I looked at my Army records that if I'd have made 3 more trips, and they would have awarded me another Distinguished Flying Cross, because that was they did it on a time basis, and I did it on a number of trips basis.
And when the war ended, were you still flying the hump?
No. I had my time, and when I finally got some relief for us, which I'll comment on in a second, then I got transferred back to the United States, and I ended up at the Reno Army Air Base. But the relief that we got, and I thought that was terrible, because I knew there was plenty of radio operators that hadn't been exposed to dangerous flying. The guys that came in and relieved us were all, to a man, corporals or sergeants, mostly all sergeants, who had flown in the, what Air Force was it that bombed Europe, 8th Air Force, and been rotated back to the United States and given a furlough, and now they transferred them over to fly the hump. And I thought, you poor bastards, you got out of that one deal now, and you don't know what you're getting into. But because the number of losses that they had in flying the hump, at least from my perspective, was pretty severe. And it was certainly severe from my immediate observation, because it was 8 in the Basha, there was 5 on flying duty, and 3 of them went down.
You felt like you were a fugitive from the law of averages, I take it.
That's right.
Okay. let's. By this time, were you married by this time?
No.
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 That happened after World War II.
Then I was transferred back to the United States and out to Reno Army Air Base.
And this is in Reno, Nevada?
Yeah.
How long were you there?
Oh, about 3 or 4 months to the end of the war. As a matter of fact, they had, while I was still there, you had to have 95 points to get transferred out of the Army. And I had 97, a lot of us had over 100. But nothing was happening because there was a general who was trying to hold us back so we could cruise planes to fly guys back out from the Pacific. And some kid that apparently knew Walter Cronkite called him and said, "How the hell is it that we can't get out of the Army with 100 points when people are being let out with 85 now, and now it's down to 75?" And 2 days later, there was a 2-star general in there with a big long table, and we were all lined up